Yeah, so I think we can just move to the next screen. This was just, yeah. So here, I want to kind of say, why should there be a chief disruption officer? I mean, why is disruption important? So I'm basically saying that, today we have about $4 trillion plus market companies, with Amazon having slipped out, and maybe there's so there's Aramco, which is non-US, but a few others. But I think in 2040, there will probably be 20 plus $1 trillion market cap companies, and many will be new impact companies serving billions of users. So making small amounts of money from a very large number of users. Okay, why do I say this? Because there is a inflection point again in technology. You have things like cloud and so on and so forth. So if you look at 20 years ago, there was an inflection point in technology with the internet, right? And there was companies which you hadn't heard of then, which today are fairly large companies, right? And some of them are very large companies. Um, most of them are US companies, and most of them were started by very young people. So it's not necessary that this will repeat. In fact, I think that uh, 20 years from now, in say 2040, uh, there will be uh, some companies which are non-US companies, which will be very large. I still think that a lot of these will be founded by very young people. So people like Elon Musk, Sergey Brin, Larry Page, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, etc., Reed Hastings, they were all very young, at that point. So I think that's going to continue. And if you are a, um, you know, two-person startup, then maybe, like one of you is a chief disruption officer. But if you are like a large company, like I know, hence you were the global innovation head at IKEA. So then, you basically need what I uh, call a chief disruption officer. So this title is not really, I think, widely used. Like you have chief technology officer, you have chief marketing officer, you have
Yeah.
chief executive officer, and so on and so forth. But you have a chief people officer, maybe a chief customer officer, but there are very few, if any, like chief disruption officers, right? There may be a chief innovation officer, but I think innovation and disruption, there's slight difference. So let's carry on. Hence, please jump in if you have any comments and things like
Yeah,
that. I don't want to kind
will
of
do.
make this a monologue thing. Yeah. Okay. So now this thing, if strategically you can make very, very large mistakes if you don't focus on disruption. And even if you do focus on disruption, if you don't do it right, you can make a very large mistake. So, for instance, in Citibank in 1998, I had taken the idea that became PayPal to Citibank, and through my boss's boss, it was presented to the board, and the board liked it. It was a good idea. But the thing was, why should we cannibalize our own business? Uh, where will we do it? We don't have an organization structure. So Citibank said, okay, let somebody else innovate and we'll buy them or we'll do whatever. And then it went on where they tried to do see to it themselves and kind of failed. And then they tried to buy buy PayPal when eBay bought it. But they decided that the price was too high and they let eBay buy it. And now, of course, the PayPal stock has fallen. But even after it's fallen, it's still, I think, neck and neck in terms of valuation with Citibank or Citigroup, right? So it can be a very large mistake if you don't get your disruption story right. Then, if you look at Goldman Sachs, which is, of course, everybody feels they have the best people, they're the best organization, and they try to do Marcus, right? And it seems such a good thing. And, if anyone was going to succeed, it would be Goldman, right? But Marcus has proven to be not such a good thing, and now they're pulling back, which in some ways is surprising, right? So I think both strategy and execution are both very important.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
just to add on, I think it's super important to get this right, specifically going forward with, I mean, technology has already increased in a speed which is breathtaking, and I think it's going further with all the different external factors like we see now wars and things coming up all the time, plus the polarization between people, which is getting
Mhm.
higher and higher. And the at least in my eyes, through that as well, the power shifting in the world. Organizations need to get into that and understand of how do they do this on an ongoing base, not just a one-off thing.
Right. Okay. I think we can move on to the next slide. So, so the question is, who does needs a CDO? Now, this may be a little debatable, but I think it doesn't matter which sector you are. So you could be in pharmaceuticals, you could be in, you know, financial services, you could be in healthcare, you could be in energy, you could be in agriculture, whatever. But every sector uh, is subject to disruption because technology can affect every sector, things like artificial intelligence and so on and so forth. And my thing is that if you're very small, then, we already mentioned a startup, you're probably the founder is the chief disruption officer. But if otherwise, if you have more than, I think, 100 plus employees, then you may think of having a chief disruption officer with a very, very small team. Even if you're a very large organization, uh, while your chief disruption officer may be there, but I don't think you need a very large team under the chief disruption officer. The team, in my opinion, has to be quite small.
Yeah, agree. Specifically, as larger the organization is, as more important is to have a very small team that's kind of, at least in my eyes, disconnected from the core business and as well not touched by the
Absolutely.
core business.
Yeah, and we'll cover that a little later as
Yeah.
well in
Yeah.
one of the tips. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, let's move on. Okay, so the first tip is to build a disruptive culture. And here I'm going to tell you a Citibank India 1985 story many, many years ago, right? But it's quite illustrative because at that point in time, in India, uh, there was a government which did not like multinationals. And they had thrown out companies like IBM and Coca Cola and stuff like that. So the CEO of Citibank India had basically a mandate to go big, or they would pull the plug on Citibank in India, right? So he went, and first of all, he hired a lot of talent from the top management school in India, right? By a lot, I mean 15, 20 people, because Citibank in India at that time was quite small. I mean, there may have been like 100 officers and maybe 350 clerical staff. Then what they did was he announced a project which he called Project Quantum and said every officer needs to submit a one pager, okay, of an idea that would make quantum growth for Citibank. Okay. And the carrot was that the 20 would be selected, and then you would go for an offsite to Goa with your significant other or spouse, children, whatever, and you would have a fun time, but it would be a working offsite as well. Okay. So I submitted an idea, and it was one of the 20. So I got to go to Goa. Once we reached there, then we these 20 ideas were presented, and six were shortlisted. Okay. Then the six were assigned to three groups because of the people whose ideas didn't get shortlisted, etc. There were like 20 people, right? So there were about three groups of people, and if you were one of the six shortlisted things, you couldn't be in the group that was working on your idea. Right? You had to work in a group which was working on the other ideas, and then these groups were presented these six ideas, and three were shortlisted. And we thought that's the end of it, like a lot of these MNC workshops, nothing much will happen after that, right? It'll be good. And, we had a great time. But soon after I got back, I used to head technology for Citibank at that time. And they told me that they had hired a replacement and I had to train that person up. And then within a month, I had a new job. So I said, what's my new job? So they said, well, you were very passionate about this idea. Now go and implement, right? So, and then I said, okay, what's my budget? What's my team? And they said, no budget, no team. Okay, you go get customers and uh, get it going. And you have the year of the CEO. We'll pull resources as you need and show us that customers want your product and etc. So we started that, and within 3 years, we had built a business which had a 95+% market share in our target market, which was the top 300 companies in India. And this was for corporate cash management, like collecting sales and paying out, uh, so transactions like that. And it generated $12 million in fees. Okay, way back in 1989. By the time I left for Thailand, because I got selected to join the international staff. Right? Now, so here the first tip is that how you build a disruptive culture. How do you get people thinking about quantum growth, right? And then how do you take say some of your top talent and actually put them to do something disruptive? Okay, is so this was one way which succeeded. There may be different ways, and it's not necessary that you're going to build $1 trillion. That's really hard, but it could be millions, and that's not bad. Right?
Yeah,
In
definitely.
fact, yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah, and maybe just to add to that, I think it's really about the leadership inside of that organization at that time that allowed to make this happen. Like putting you and the others into this space, and like you said, often it's the case that you're coming home from that and then nothing is happening. But it's going from this theory setting where you discuss, where you develop the paper, to a practical setting where they say, okay, we replace you in your normal job and we get you going, and you figure it out almost like an internal startup, which I think that's
absolutely.
the trust into you as a leader for this idea, into your passion, and then giving you, of course, the opportunities to build stuff and getting the resources on the way if you show the traction with your customers. I think that's very good learning.
Yeah. So one other thing that I want to add is, just as somebody could be an excellent technologist, right? Like could write killer code, right? Or manage something huge in terms of architecture or whatever, right? Similarly, the person who is part of this disruptive team has to be a very good disruptive thinker and to some extent an executor. If you're
Yeah.
just thinkers, it's crazy. Like so, another person. So there were three of us, right? There were three ideas. So one of the other people who also built a fairly large business today is the CEO of the Development Bank of Singapore, a person called Piyush Gupta, right? So
Cool.
you can see the caliber of the people who were there, trying to execute these things.
Yeah.
If you don't have the right caliber people, it will fail.
Yeah.
So you really have to focus on getting the right people.
Yeah, and
Okay, maybe we
maybe
can go.
just to add on before we move to the next part, you have these people in your company. If you're a large company, you have these people. You just need to give them a
Yeah,
possibility to shine, and it's really then trying to find them
right.
takes a little bit of effort.
Yeah, and I was like 27. Piyush was probably 26 or 25 at that
Yeah.
time. So you can see we were very young. We
Yeah.
weren't like vice presidents or something like that, right? We were like assistant managers or managers or something like that,
Yeah.
right? At that time. Yeah. Okay.
Do you want to go into the next slide?
Yes, please.
Good. Here we are.
Okay. So then the thing is that uh, this tip is pursuing disruptive ideas. So from India, I moved to Thailand. Now, one of the expectations was that I would try and replicate what I'd done in India in Thailand, right? But the Thailand market was quite different. And I felt that the cash management thing that we had done in India would not necessarily replicate to Thailand. So, but I was heading the transaction banking business for Thailand, which was trade, custodial services, and cash management. So when I looked at the entire landscape, I felt that there was a very big opportunity in custodial services to grow our market share. Right? So essentially, I sort of pursued that idea, and it was also a very major success. So the second tip is that you got to look at the environment. You got to look at the pain points. You got to look at what has a high chance of success, right? It may be very difficult, right? Like on the Citibank India story, we were a very small foreign bank with 6 branches in 4 cities. And the largest bank in India probably had 6,000 branches. Okay. Now, how are you going to do cash management across the country with just 6 branches in 4 cities? So obviously you need partners. There were no courier services at that time in India. But technology was very different at that particular point in time. But we found solutions for everything. We built the largest network in India by partnering with various banks. Okay, we set up courier services by setting up processes for a particular company
Yeah.
which wanted to develop courier services in India, and so on. So the thing is that if your idea is disruptive, uh, then actually executing it and making uh, it a success and getting huge market share is a fairly tough task, which covers maybe creating new things, like figuring out the regulatory side, doing lots of things, right?
Yeah.
It's not easy, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I like that. So it's basically you need to develop the ecosystem and the kind of the distribution of that idea alongside. So it's not just working on, let's say, on the technology, if it's a technology topic, it's also working with things that might have nothing to do with the core product or the core idea, but you need to work on the other things to be able to make it happen and as well then increase or scale it.
Yeah, and in the custodial services, the thing which sort of tipped the thing and made it a success was that electronic banking at that time was something new. And the general thing was, hey, we're doing this electronic banking, we've invested so much money in it. So if you want electronic banking, we are going to charge you for that electronic banking. But one of the things I realized was that in this particular product, because it was holding shares in custody, which were paper at that time, for various global investors who wanted to invest in Thailand, that for them, if we had superior technology and we could just give them all the reports using technology, they could transact with us using technology, then we would have a real edge over our competition. And so we did that. We spent some real effort on going, understanding how the customers use our technology, because our technology was not very good initially when we looked at how customers actually use it. But once we got it to be good, then I changed the pricing. I made electronic free, right? And I charge for paper. Okay. So that was extremely revolutionary at that point in time, right? But it, and because in custodial services to win market share is really hard, because the effort on migrating your custodian is not trivial. So a person has to have a really good reason to go through that pain. So we are also to figure out how we'll help them migrate and this, that, and the other, and which is why our share moved from 1% to 36%, but we couldn't take it higher.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But I mean, that's already a huge increase. So
yeah, yeah,
it's already good disruption.
yeah, yeah. Okay, I think we can move to the next one. Okay, so tip three is think big and execute small, right? So you can so this is the PayPal story, right? So I joined X.com along with Elon. So I was, I think, the seventh person in the company and on the management team. So the management team was very small. Like there were basically two or three of us, right? I mean, in there. So uh, the thing was that right from the beginning, and the reason I joined Elon was that we had a huge vision. Okay, so we thought that this company someday will move over $1 trillion of money annually. And it was only like 5 or 6 quarters back that PayPal has actually is moving over 250 billion every quarter, right? But right from the beginning, we said, yeah, we're going to disrupt payments and we're going to do this, right? So there was no, I mean, especially with Elon, a lot of people know Elon, right? You can't blame him for thinking small, right? You
That's
can
true.
maybe blame him for a lot of other things, but you can't blame him for thinking small. Um, so the thing was, but we were very practical and said that, yeah, the first thing we have to do is we have to launch a version of PayPal very quickly, right? So I joined in the end of September 99, and by 7th December 1999, and I still remember that date exactly because it was like Pearl Harbor Day. And apart from it being Pearl Harbor Day, it was also, we wanted to launch before Christmas, right? Because then we had that $10 giveaway, and for opening an account, and if you refer someone, you get $10. So we ended up getting 250,000 accounts by January 31st, which was more than all the online accounts across all financial services in the US, right? So, so the thing was that you have to execute. So this is before people wrote all these books on lean startup and MVP and all this kind of stuff, right? Uh, but we were like uh, executing very rapidly. Another thing we said, yeah, we're going to go global. So something like Unicode, which was a coding thing for coding in multiple languages, was very new in 1999. And if we had tried to code in Unicode, we would have had trouble finding engineers. So we said, the hell with it. We will code in normal code. Some of the code we might throw away. And then, as it happened, we went to 14 countries with English only websites, including France. And people told us in France, people hate English. Okay. And nobody will use it, but they all used it. Right. And France was a number five country or number four country. I don't remember. Right. So the thing is, you have to understand, and you have to put all these things together. And this other point of business architecture, so this is again a term which is not very well understood, I think. People understand technical architecture. Maybe they understand business architecture right now. But for us, the business architecture was critical. And Elon and I and the technical person, a guy called Colin, the three of us used to work the full day because others were working. Uh, of course, we worked the weekends also the full day. And then on weekdays, we would go shower, whatever, have an early dinner, and be back in office by 8 p.m. And then we would work till 2 p.m., 2 a.m., 3 a.m. And then we would be back again at, say, 8 a.m., right? So we actually did 100-hour work weeks.
Mm.
Okay. And, but so over that course of the 2 months or 2.5 months that it took us to launch the first version of X.com, really, not PayPal, but the first version of X.com, we would have spent about 500 plus hours on thinking what the business architecture would be, right? And this, you'd say, why would you take 500 plus hours? But, it's really hard because we did so many things. We said, no, this won't work. We threw it away, then we started again, and so I think a lot of people, they neglect the step, you
Yeah.
know, they, and they say, oh, let's put something in the market, we learn from that, right? Which is all okay. I'm saying you can't just keep figuring out sitting in an armchair and doing business architecture. But the thing is, uh, you can do both, right? I mean, you can, like, if you kill yourself, right, more or less, right?
Yeah.
With the hours that you work.
But
So yeah, if
what I
you're a
would like
disrupt,
to highlight was that specifically if we talk about the corporates in this world, this is counterintuitive for a lot of big organizations where it's more about we can only launch something that's 100% perfect. It's way too risky to do something like this example, to put something out that's not 100% working, that's English in all countries. Like, a lot of companies would try not to do that at all. Plus, the other part is, and I agree with you, that certain times when you want to get something launched that is extreme, you need to put the work in and do that in a different way than you normally would ever do. And that's again a hurdle for larger organization who is working 100 hours plus in a large organization. And then, I mean,
yeah,
specifically, if we
exactly,
talk about Europe, that's not usual, and that's also in some countries even not legal to do it, and
right.
that's hindering you
And
already in doing this step.
yeah, so you can't order anyone to work those kind of hours and all that
Yeah,
kind of stuff. And actually, when I was in Citibank, I was involved in a project as a Citibank US rep on a team that was doing the conversion to the euro. So I was working with European colleagues, and some of my European colleagues told me, you guys, you Americans are crazy, right? You live to work while we work to live. So I said, yes, that's very good. I would also like to work to live only. But the uh, thing is that sometimes, you got to live to work because you enjoy your work so much, right? It is a passion. In my opinion, I have not seen, too many really large successful disruptions where the people are not working for money, right? They're working because this is their idea. They
yeah,
want to change the world. There is passion, you know. So, if you're just trying to, and this is one of the factors, uh, you see, that's common even in the first Citibank example. Nobody told us to do this idea, right? It was our idea. Okay, we wanted to do it, right? So they gave us the framework to be able to do it,
yeah, yeah.
right? So this is pretty important. I mean, this maybe it works the other way. I don't know, but in my experience, if you don't have the passion, um, uh, you know, uh, so and like I see some comments about like how do you incentivize people and all. I don't know. The incentive is making your passion real. I mean, like, yes, the stock options, you make a lot of money, you become wealthy and all that. That is okay, in my view, hygiene factors. But if those are things that are really driving you, then it's hard. You know,
You're not putting
uh,
the work in. I agree.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you're not working. See, a lot of, like, through the whole thing in PayPal, there were many days we'd come back and say, "Hey, this is going to fail," right? The other days we would say, "Wow, this is going to succeed." And why PayPal succeeded is a whole combination of luck, skill, talent, a lot of things. I mean, it wasn't just one single thing. So if we were, always thinking about, plotting like, okay, is this going to be big or this is, we wouldn't have lasted.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
agree. I see it
we,
in other companies in the same way.
yeah,
Yeah, just for the comments we get, we will do a little Q&A in the beginning, in the end. Sorry. So Stuart, thank
mm,
you for commenting and putting the comments into YouTube. We'll come to them as well.
yeah. Okay. Now, the fourth tip is that what you do should be truly disruptive, right? This I said, there's a difference between innovation and disruption, right? Now, innovation, you could do incremental innovation, and those are quite useful. I mean, in terms of doing things. So I'm not trying to poo-poo innovation, very important. But the thing is that if you're truly disruptive, like for instance, in Citibank in India in 1985, we came up with the concept of instant collections, right? Like, so basically, your dealer gave you a check, you came with that check to Citibank, okay, and we totaled up your checks and we marked a credit line and we gave you instant credit in your account wherever you were headquartered. Right? That was very revolutionary because it would take like 7 to 8 days for the money to reach you otherwise. Okay, because it would have to go through clearing, then it would get cleared, then it would sit in an account, then the money would accumulate, then it would be transferred, and so on. So, right? So it was something which was, people said, really? You can do that? And we charged them a fair amount of money, right? Like a single transfer of this instant collection things for some fertilizer companies who got huge subsidies from the government could cost, like at that time, around 8,000 US dollars, right? Because we were not just doing a transfer, right? It was instant, right? And the value of the money to the company was huge, right? The value of the float to the bank was not huge, right? So there was an arbitrage here, right? So I already talked about the electronic free in the case of Citibank custody. In PayPal, there was a very big thing that we made payments, push payments instead of pull payments. And what does that mean? So with a credit card, someone can swipe it and they can pull money from your account. But with PayPal, the merchant has nothing. They can't pull money from your account, right? You have to push money to the merchant, right? Now, this was very revolutionary because it made anyone could become a merchant because I didn't have to do a credit evaluation of the merchant, right? Now, this last one is something that maybe we'll put a link after this webinar. So, I was one of the original thinkers of the idea that became PayPal, this payments and email combination. And it was really payment and like a universally unique global ID, which was email, later became mobile, and so on and so forth. But that was the general idea. So now I think that uh, the credit markets can be disrupted with universal, cheap, responsible credit. And here I would, so I have a bit of a teaser there. I'm not too old to do all this myself, but I would love for, so the next Elon Musk or whatever to try and see if this meets that person's standard and they can execute it. Uh, but the whole thing is that I think that this idea could be $1 trillion idea because credit markets are bigger than payment markets. And this is just giving you an example because I understand financial services, I understand the pain. I understand that if you want to eradicate poverty, not just alleviate poverty, um, so um the whole thing is that then you need credit to be cheap, you need it to be universal, and credit is like a drug. If you OD on it, it will destroy you, right? So, how do you make the use of credit responsible? These are all very hard problems. Okay. And that's the other thing. I mean, if you want to do something truly disruptive, in my view, it has to be a really hard problem where you say, you present this, you go to your wife or your friends or somebody, and they say, "Are you nuts?" Right? This will never happen. Right? Okay. So if you are not a little nuts, okay, then maybe your idea is not truly disruptive. That doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, right? But the truly disruptive ideas are like, oh, I'm going to colonize Mars, okay, or I'm going to like make electric cars and stuff like that.
Yeah, I love that. We got a question from Paul, which we will put as well into the end. So, Paul, please stay until the end. We will do a Q&A in the end.
Yeah.
Okay, next one.
Okay. Okay. We kind of covered this already, but so the thing is that uh, the thing about small teams, right? So you have what is popularly known as a skunk works. There's this term called BHAGs, big, hairy, audacious goals. And there's this business as usual. So now, especially for large organizations, yeah, like, or even for medium organizations or small organizations, you have a business as usual which you cannot neglect, right? Because that's what's paying the bills right now. Right? And so you got to focus on that. Now, if you take some of your best people out of business as usual, that is a big opportunity cost, right? But if you take them out and you put them in a skunk works, that is your hedge against the future, right? So what I say is that with the small investment, it's like heads I win big, tails I don't lose much, right?
Yeah.
So this is the kind of thing. So this thing of compartmentalizing business as usual and skunk works is really important. And like one of the good things that Citibank did when they isolated us is that even if there was a fire in the business as usual type of thing, they did not pull us out.
Yeah.
We were left to work on our disruptive idea, right?
Yeah, it's
Because
it,
otherwise, this is a great tendency, right? Like I was head of technology. Now there's a problem in technology. Let's come and get this guy only for 4 days, only for four
yeah,
hours. No,
exactly.
right? You just can't do that because you got to leave them to do their thing.
Yeah, because 4 hours we'll get 4 weeks, we'll get 4 months, we'll get 4 years, worst
Yeah.
case.
No, and it's like this, that this thing is something where uh, disruptive thinkers. It's a chain of thought. You break that thought. They are dreaming about this every day, every night. Their subconscious is working. You can't take them in and out.
Yeah.
I don't think so, at least. Right. And sometimes, like my son actually told my wife that I want to have a job like my dad, right? Because sometimes he would just see me dreaming into space at home, and like he'd say, "What are you like?" He'd ask me a question, and I'd say, "Can't you see I'm working?" He said, "What is this working?" I also would love to have a job like this, right? Where you're just staring into space and you're working, right? Anyway, yeah. So let's move on to the next step. Okay, so there is a DNA of disruptive innovation, in my opinion, right? So most organizations don't have that DNA. So like when Citibank in 2000 tried to copy PayPal, now PayPal exists, right? You've just got to reverse engineer it, right? It's successful. Now PayPal has 1 million customers at that point in time. Citibank has 18 million touch points, right? So who will win? It seems obvious that Citibank will win. But because they don't have the DNA, they don't understand this business, they don't understand the internet, they go and make such a hash of it. They could not bring themselves to make sending money free. They said, we'll charge $1. It's like, no, but that $1 kills it.
Yeah.
you you can't do. Now I have was a customer. I mean, I had worked 18 years in Citibank, right? But to join C2it, I had to fill like a two-page form on the internet, right? Now they don't understand the internet, right? Like two-page form. Okay, it should be single click.
Yeah.
Now Amazon came up with buy now with one click, but that's what the internet is, right? Now, if you don't have the DNA and you have your compliance and you have your, I don't know what, right? Then the whole thing won't work,
Yeah,
right?
this for me
How,
is a very big one because a lot of organizations believe they can do whatever they want. And yes, financially they might be, but I agree with you, if the DNA is not there, where you put a team on the side and give them possibilities, disruptive opportunities as well, where they don't need to follow all the different rules. Because if they just need to follow,
yes,
let's say, if we just take purchasing as one of the many examples, need to get 20,000 offers before they do any move, it's always 6 weeks later, everything.
yeah,
Or they need to present a
right,
business case to the board, and then it's again 2 months later.
correct. So let's move on to the next step. Okay, now this I think addresses even one of the questions that I see in the chat. That choose the right execution choice. So now, like if you are a CDO in a large organization, right, and you have a very small team, maybe two people, and you are a person, and so you have a choice to try and do something in house. In which case, like Citibank did, you do your whole workshop, whatever it is, and you get uh, some ideas, you get the champions, and then you resource it and you try and do. So it can work if you isolate, if you get the right people, you don't worry about cannibalization, etc. So I won't say none of these ideas are, none of these execution choices are, it'll never work, right? So you could do it in house. You could incubate, right? So you could have a venture round and you could look for ventures. Okay. You could say that these ventures have the right DNA, they have the right people, etc., etc. And I'm going to be their anchor customer and do that. And then I'm going to take a stake because, hey, if I make you successful, then I want some money too, right? And then maybe you could buy them out, or, whatever, or you just keep a minority stake. Like, for instance, Yahoo stake in Alibaba, turned out to be pretty lucrative, right? In there, um, you could also look at acquiring companies, right? Like at various points in time. So this is, in some ways, hopefully giving you a flavor of what a CDO could do,
Yeah.
right? Uh, so with their small team, they can look at all these choices, right? The small team cannot do a disruptive thing by themselves,
Yeah.
right? They have to kind of, so very much like technical, like there's a difference between a technical architect or a CTO and a VP engineering, right? A CTO is closer to a CDO, right? They are putting the disruptive architecture in place for the organization, which may include all these three components,
Yeah.
right? Okay, let's move on to the next one. Okay, so again, I think I've repeated this, but people matter, right? So you have to have the right CDO, right? And then that CDO has to be able to find the right people and so on and so forth. So um, since I work closely with Elon, I think one of Elon's key skills is to find the right people and then to motivate them to join, right?
Yeah.
So he, like I remember, like when he was trying to recruit me. Um, and he was very young at that time, not very well known. So, I was obviously very skeptical. Why should I join this guy? Right? Like, in this thing. So, um, first he asked me very many things, and he got convinced that he wanted me to join his team. So this was actually at a burger joint called Taxis on University Avenue, which no longer exists, but it was a 24-hour place. And he purposely chose that because we started talking at 8 o'clock and we finished at maybe 2 a.m. or 3 a.m., something like that. Because, the first part was his trying to assess me. Then the second part was that he was trying to tell me why I should join him. And the third part was negotiating the comp and all that kind of stuff. Right? In there. And there also it was an interesting story because I said, look, I'm going to join only if I'm a vice president, whatever. And being a vice president in a startup in Silicon Valley is quite different from being a vice president at Citibank, because it's pretty
Yeah, slightly.
significant. Yeah. And, and then I said, these are my terms, this is how much stock I want, blah, blah, blah. Right. So he said, okay, the only negative that I have for you is that you've never worked in a startup and you may be a big company guy, right? But otherwise, I really like. So let's work for 15 days together, and if I like you and you like me, and then we'll do a deal. Otherwise, I'll pay you some figure, I forget what, and we'll call it quits. Okay. So I said, yeah, sure, works for me, right? So it ended up being like a 15-day interview, right? And at the end of it, he said, yeah, all your terms are good. Right? You're done. Right? But so how you identify and find the right people? I think in some other thing on Elon, I saw that for Tesla, he hired um, the guy who ran Apple stores, who was retired. Okay. Also, for a little while, he asked me to head Starlink in India. Okay, so he's really good at trying to find people. So I was very surprised. I said, why do you? I know nothing about this space. I have no idea of satellites. I know nothing of space. I'm a financial services guy, right? But he said, no, like you'll help me figure out India. And we figured out that it was not going to work for a little while, and so we called it quits. And now I heard Starlink has again applied for a license, but it was good. So the basic thing is that people matter, very
Yeah.
important.
And I think that's on all the different people that are involved in the disruption part, but as well specifically, I think the person that's chosen to lead, if it is an internal person, the person that's chosen to lead this part, like the chief disruption officer, there needs to be a lot of trust towards specifically the board, because
Yeah.
most probably, at least in my experience, I could guess that the chief disruption officer will have arguments with the CEO,
Hmm.
because the chief disruption officer is eating away from the cake of the CEO, if you think about core business. But then the board, and the chairman of the board, they need to trust this person, that this person is doing the right thing from a long-term perspective.
Right. Yeah. So this whole cannibalization point is very important, and the other aspect of it is that like the chief disruption officer may hire consultants, to do
Yeah.
various things, workshops, this, that, and the other, how to build a disruptive culture and various things, right? So they need to have some sort of a budget, but in my opinion, it doesn't have to be a very large budget. Like, so this is like your R&D center, right?
Yeah.
So like in financial services, I don't think they have a formal R&D. At least they didn't have. Now they may. But in pharmaceutical companies and things, they have a formal R&D, right? Like I don't know about people like IKEA and all, whether they had a formal R&D budget and
Yeah.
process and
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But typically, a certain percentage of sales should be allocated to R&D.
Yeah. Agree.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. I think we are just going to make it in time. So, right. So tip nine is do not lose your mojo. So now if you look at PayPal from 2002 to 2022, right? So PayPal stock has fallen drastically, right? Then after it spun off, it rose drastically, right? So at any point in time, you can lose your mojo, right? Of being a disruptive leader or whatever, right? So for instance, you have things like Square, which emerged, you have Stripe, and all those kind of things. Now, if it was the original founding team in PayPal, I, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm being too arrogant or whatever, but I don't think these people would have emerged. We would have, we would have looked at everything and we would have sort of been at least a major player. I'm not saying in their not this dominant market share because antitrust and all probably wouldn't have let us.
Yeah.
But the thing is that to some extent, maybe PayPal has lost its mojo, right? But it may get it back. But it's very important that at any point in time you can lose your mojo.
Yeah.
Right?
And as
So let's
bigger
move
you
on.
get, as harder it is to keep it.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the last tip. Okay, so this is again a very, mm, some may say Pollyannish view, but it is about that if you think of making the world better, right? And in earth, education, equity covers everything, like this credit, healthcare, whatever it is, right? This thing of democratizing things and all that kind of stuff, right? Then chances are you may do this. If you want to do this at scale, you have to make a lot of money, right? So these may be areas where there are tremendous pain points, right? So, like poverty is a major pain point. How can I eradicate poverty? Not because it's a good thing to do, but because if I do it, I'll make a lot of money.
Yeah.
you know, so there are lots of people who are alleviating poverty, right? So there are a few things that again I'll send to you, Hans, and you can put it in the thing. So like this credit thing, and then I have an idea around global prosperity labs, which could be set up at universities around the world, and they could, like you have a chair for oncology or whatever cancer research or whatever. This could be like a chair which somebody could endow, and this could be money making, right? So it could do disruptive innovation workshops, it could do executive education, it could take a particular area, geographical area, and transform it. Okay, so many things like that,
Yeah.
right? It could be done, and you could have an open source platform where millions of people join with the idea of electing better leaders and so on and so forth. So I won't bore you with that. That's a topic for a totally different. We could go on and on.